Let me start by introducing our guest today. Russell Hancock is President and Chief Executive Officer of joint venture Silicon Valley, position he has held since 2003. In these roles, Dr. Hancock is best described variously as a civic leader, community gatherer, institution builder, civic entrepreneur, social scientist, and outspoken advocate for regionalism. Since taking the helm, he has grown the size of the organization tenfold, assembled a potent board filled with mayors, CEOs, and university presidents, built strategic partnerships, recruited a highly talented staff, founded the Institute for Regional Studies, of which he is president, and launched initiatives that are delivering measurable results to the region. Russell is also the founder of the annual State of the Valley Conference, a town hall meeting attracting more than 1,500 leaders for a day spent in dialogue and discussion about the Valley's challenges and opportunities. The conference features the release of the Silicon Valley Index, a document now receiving national and international attention. Founded in 1993, Joint Venture Silicon Valley is a think tank that catalyzes action by spotlighting issues and by convening the region's leaders for collaborative action to equitably benefit the entire community. The nonprofit organization, created and funded by stakeholders from business, government, academia, labor, and nonprofits, provides research, analysis, and a neutral platform for collective solutions. Its approach fosters consensus building and collective action on what vital issues such as economic development, infrastructure, transportation, and education. Analysis and research is provided by the organization's research arm, the Silicon Valley Institute for Regional Studies. Research topics focus on economic and community health issues in Silicon Valley and the greater Bay Area and on broader regional issues. Educated at Harvard in the field of government, Russell received a PhD in political science from Stanford University, where he currently teaches in the public policy program. You can learn more at jointventure.org. We're thrilled to have Russell with us here today. We know you're very busy, and we really appreciate your spending some time with us. Russell will begin with a presentation. Russell, do you want to share your screen?
I will do it. Thank you. Kim,
you.
that was a quick introduction. I'm honored to have your invitation. And I want to thank the Community Coalition for the work that you do, for being engaged, for being people who care about community. I'm honored to spend this time with you together. I will share my screen. My assignment this morning is to talk about what's happening in the region and see if we can make some sense of it. So I look forward to that. I relish the assignment. There it is. That's what we look like from outer space. And I think it's interesting. I always like to remind ourselves that everything that I'm going to talk about today is happening on this narrow peninsula, a valley that, as you can see, is for the most part completely built out. Then is surrounded on three sides by water and ringed by hills, mountains, and permanently protected open space. So everything that we discuss is happening in this very complicated, very fixed geographical terrain. Then I want to just start by reminding us about Silicon Valley's amazing history. And if I were to try to capture it in a single image, this would be the image. And this shows Silicon Valley going back 70, 80 years. And over that period of time, we've lived through these remarkable revolutions and reinventions. And a lot of it is well known. This is the place where we started working with vacuum tube technology and solid state physics, and it led us to the integrated circuit, and it led us to the computer revolution and the personal computer revolution, software revolutions, and all of these things. A lot of people don't fully appreciate that while all of that was happening, there were simultaneous revolutions in other areas like biotechnology and the mapping of the human genome. Recombinant DNA, also revolutions in energy efficiency, storage, and no accident that the center of gravity around electric vehicles, also right here in the valley. So I just want all of us to understand that this picture you're looking at that captures all of those waves of innovation. This picture is remarkable. There's no other place in the world that can present this kind of history. And what's so striking about it is that every one of these curves on the chart is presenting an industry life cycle. In other words, these are industries that were introduced, reached a period of maturation, and then went defunct. And all of these waves, separate waves of innovation, have different characteristics about them, different functional requisites, different economies of scale, completely different technical problems that they had to surmount. And what's interesting is that we've been able to do it in all of these fields, in all of these areas, consistently over this long 80-year period. When we all took our college economics classes, we weren't taught this. This is not an outcome that economists predict. In fact, standard economic theory predicts the opposite result. They predict that economic advantage is always shifting to different players and different localities. And yet here's Silicon Valley doing it, and doing it in a sustained way over a very long period of time. So that's remarkable. I think we should just all understand Silicon Valley in that context. And then today, with that context, we're going to talk about what's happening in Silicon Valley right now. And I'll be asking this provocative question: are we still performing in this way? Are we still a region that is characterized by innovation, entrepreneurship? Is that dynamism here? Is it threatened? I'd like to talk about it in that way, not only from an economic standpoint, but also from a social standpoint. So that's our mission. And in the few minutes that we share together this morning, I will try to answer some of those questions. And I'm really looking forward to your questions and commentary and your own observations. Let's start by talking about the economy. And I want to begin by telling you that that's the number of people that are in our workforce, 1.7 million in Silicon Valley. By the way, we define Silicon Valley as San Mateo County, Santa Clara County, part of Alameda County. That's how we think of it. It also makes sense to talk about the entire Bay Area, all 9 counties, certainly including San Francisco. And so we talk about it in that way too. And I'll be very clear when I'm showing you numbers and charts, if I'm showing you the entire region or if I'm showing you what we've defined as Silicon Valley. But right here in the south part of the Bay, we have about 1.7 million people in the workforce. And you may be wondering, is that growing or is that shrinking? Well, it's growing. We've grown by 1% since 2019. And I'm pegging it to that year because that's the last year before the pandemic set in. And there is a sense among most people that something bad, something staggering has happened to our economy, and that we're not fully recovered. I actually want you to know that we actually are fully recovered. We're ahead of where we were by most indicators when you compare the economy now to the economy prior to the pandemic. This, by the way, is our unemployment rate. We're at about 3.5%. And most economists will tell you that that is the equivalent of full employment. When the pandemic set in, we skyrocketed up to around 16%. That's a very high level of unemployment. That compares, by the way, to about 25% during the Great Depression in 1929. So we were starting to approach something like that, but and then those numbers quickly came down as we learned how to work from home, and then as the economy gradually began to reopen. So here we are, we're at about 3.5%, and that's practically the equivalent of full employment. However, that doesn't seem to be the tone or the tenor of most conversations. In fact, if you pick up the paper, what people are talking about are the loss of jobs. They're talking about people departing the Bay Area, and they're certainly talking about layoffs. That seems to be the topic du jour. And so I'd like to talk about that. In fact, I'd like to talk about the major topics that seem to be occupying people's headspace. One would be layoffs. Can we get a handle on that? Can we put those in broad perspective? Second question I'd like to handle is the notion of exodus. Are people leaving the Bay Area, and are they leaving the region in numbers that are significant enough to change our prospects? And then I'd also like to get a handle on what remote work looks like in the Bay Area today and what that is doing to our economy. So I want to take up those three questions. And then just so you know, after we talk about those, I'd like to finally talk about some social conditions in the Bay Area and what it's like to live here. So I want to talk about the Bay Area as not only as an economy, but also as a place. Well, let's understand the layoffs. This is the absolute number. So since August of 2022 until now, we have seen 38,000 layoffs, and you've seen those detailed in the press, lots of headlines going by, and that's a significant number, 38,000. But I'd like us all to understand that number in perspective. So if you took that number, 38,000, and you asked, what is the percentage of Silicon Valley's total workforce? Well, the answer is 1.7%. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about a fluctuation with about one, call it 2%, if you want to round up, of our workforce. So I think it's important that we understand it in that context. The layoffs, by the way, are mostly in the tech sector. And so you could ask, well, what's the percentage in the tech sector? And the answer there is roughly 6%. That's what we're talking about. I want you to know that when we had the dot-com burst at the turn of the century, that was 150,000 jobs that were lost in our region. And so I think we also need to understand it in that context. So here we're understanding it in the context of the overall workforce. Then if you compare it to our most calamitous event in Silicon Valley's history, well, it's nowhere approaching it. It's nowhere approaching what we experienced then. And so I think we need to understand the layoffs in that context. You should also understand that we continue to have those low rates of unemployment. And so what is that telling you? It's telling you that most of the people who are being laid off have landed on their feet. In fact, we have surveys from ZipRecruiter and other workforce organizations that have shown us that most people who are laid off in the tech sector are reemployed, re-engaged within 3 months, and that's even before their severance has run out. So, despite the headlines, despite a sense of gloom that seems to have set into the Bay Area, I think we should understand that actually this economy is robust and operating still at full employment. And one sign of our dynamism is that even when there are displacements and upheavals, we still have an economy that is showing how to absorb that. And that's important to understand. And I'd like you to remember once again this chart, the chart I led off with, this one. Don't ever forget that every one of these S curves represents that cycle, industries reaching a point of maturity and then becoming defunct, being replaced by some other competing industry or superseding industry. And every one of those curves is accompanied by upheavals, displacements, and large numbers of people laid off. That's our history. That's how you summarize the history of an innovative, dynamic, innovative, churning economy. So that's, I would like to argue that that's how we should understand the layoffs in that context. Now, let's talk about the exodus, because this is a question of great concern. So is it true that we've seen a massive departure of people from the Silicon Valley workforce? Well, that's the raw number. We had about 67,000 people leave the region in that 2-year period. And by the way, it is now curtailed. We are no longer seeing departures at this level. In fact, the number of departures has become noise in the model. But over that 2-year period, we did lose about 67,000 folks. So again, if we were to understand that in terms of our total workforce, now you're talking about less than 5% of the total workforce that departed. But they were concentrated in tech. And so the question was the tech sector experiencing some major kind of hit? I think that would be a misunderstanding, because remember, many of these people who are departing are still holding on to their Silicon Valley job. They're not living here, but they're actually working remotely for Silicon Valley companies. And so I'm not sure that we should understand this as a massive or a calamitous upheaval for Silicon Valley. What we should understand it as a new trend and one that will continue. By the way, our population is shrinking, and it has been shrinking for a long time. This is a chart that shows you over our population trends over a long 25-year period. But I want you to understand that population growth or population decline has many components, and it doesn't include just the number of people who are leaving the region. It also includes our birth rate. And Silicon Valley's birth rate has been declining significantly for a long run of years. And so that's one thing we have to understand. We also have to understand that we have an aging population. And so this is what we look like when we look at our population as births minus deaths. And we've been shrinking in that way for a long period of years. And then finally, there's the question of migration, net migration. So you take your in migration and you subtract the out migration. And that's where we've been losing ground. But it corresponds to, it started happening in 2016. And that corresponds to the Trump administration when Trump took the White House and set a new tenor, a new tone around immigration for our entire country. And so it's no surprise that we saw people coming to our region and coming into California, but it's coming into California in smaller numbers than ever before in our history. And that for us, for Silicon Valley, that is highly, highly, highly significant. Well, so when you put all those things together, then you start to understand our population trends. And yes, we've been losing ground for a long time. But I have some good news on that front. Those trends have now reversed themselves. So the pace of people leaving the region has slowed down by around 50%. And then the pace of people coming from other countries into our region has started growing again. And in the last calendar year is growing by 37%. In other words, the tenor has changed once again. And now we're seeing these pathways for talented people to come into Silicon Valley and to pursue their path to innovation and their path to the kind of prosperity that Silicon Valley has promised historically. So that's how we should understand the outmigration or the exodus, as people are referring to it colloquially. But there's one other thing I would have you understand. We took a look at the people that are leaving that were leaving the region, those 67,000. We discovered something interesting. We discovered that fully a quarter of them were not leaving the region. They were simply moving to the perimeter of the region. And that makes sense because that's where the housing was more affordable. And it was no longer necessary for them to be physically present in their workplace. And so they could go to places that were more affordable. So that's how we should understand 25% of the departures. Then another 25% we discovered were staying in California and going to what I refer to as greater Silicon Valley. In other words, they're going to Davis, they're going to Sacramento, they're going to greater Sacramento, they're also going to Monterey, places like that. So these places are more affordable, but still in California and still in driving distance. And in fact, as employers were saying, we'd like to see you in the office once, twice, even 3 times a week. That's still possible for that percentage of our workforce who had relocated themselves. Okay, and then if you're interested in where the final 50%, where are they going? We discovered that they're going to Texas, definitely going to Austin. That's a growth region, but also going to places like New York, Seattle, Salt Lake, and Arizona. So those are the places that are starting to pick up Silicon Valley expatriates. I would like to also tell you that I think there's an accompanying question that we need to ask. One question is, are we losing people? But another very important question is, are we losing companies? And if that were the case, that would be hugely significant. But the answer to this question is not really. We're not losing companies. We've lost 4 since the pandemic set in. And these are those 4 companies. And what's significant about these companies is that even though they moved their headquarters to another state, they left their employees behind. In fact, every one of these, I'm sorry, with the exception of Palantir, but these others, Oracle, HP, Tesla, have expanded their footprint. They've built out facilities, including R&D facilities and manufacturing facilities, and they're continuing to grow here in Silicon Valley, even though they moved their headquarters. And so I think we should understand the exodus in that way. Okay, so we've talked about exits. We've talked about the layoffs. I'd like to ask the next question, which is, how's the economy doing? Remember that economy we described with all those S curves and all of the reinvention. Is our innovation engine still firing? Well, let me show you a couple of charts about that. Here's venture capital. And this is an amazing chart for a couple of reasons. One is that you will see in year 2021, this enormous spike, incredible spike. Look at that. We generated about $92 billion, billion with a B. That's an amazing number. It's amazing we've never seen. And by the way, this is inflation adjusted. So that's more venture capital than we raised during the dot-com craziness. And it happened in the height of the pandemic. So amazing. That's just absolutely amazing. Now, there are some people who thought, well, that's our new norm. And so now we should benchmark ourselves against that year, the year 2021. I would like to suggest that that would be a mistake on our part. We should understand 21 is kind of a crazy year where there were a lot of amazing things happening as the world began sheltering in place. And it turned out that Silicon Valley companies had exactly what a sheltering world needed in order to thrive. The platforms, the services, the goods, the computational processing, the apps, all of those tools that we needed, the streaming, all of the rest of it, that just played into Silicon Valley's strengths. And so we demonstrated more economic activity and investment activity in our entire history. In the years since then, we've leveled off again. But I always tell people when they look at this chart that if we were to take out that year, remove 21, you would still see that venture capital is growing and is moving in that northeasterly direction. That's really how we should understand this. So anyway, from an investment standpoint, we should understand Silicon Valley is alive, thriving, and continuing to move into these new and promising areas. By the way, this shows our share of venture capital, and our share of the state and our share of the nation continues to grow and continues to be the highest shares of any place on the planet. Now, as we think about our innovation engine and whether we're still on the leading edge and the cutting edge of new and emerging technologies, the one that everybody's talking about is artificial intelligence. So I'd like you to understand where we are with respect to AI. And here's one indicator. That's venture capital going into those kinds of activities. And over the past calendar year, venture investments grew by 220%, staggering amounts. So if you think AI is the next big wave of innovation, and if you're wondering if we're capturing that wave, well, here's one indicator that would suggest that we're absolutely heads and tails above all of the rest. And then this chart is telling you the same thing, just this explosion in the amount of funding in Silicon Valley going into these kinds of companies. But here are other indicators that I think are really significant. The citations in academic journals, not only venture investing, but institutional investing from the big tech firms, our share of patents, the number of companies that are being located here. This, by the way, it shows you the top 50 generative AI companies in the United States. And of those 50, look at this, half are right here in the Bay Area. That's really significant. So if that's what you're most interested to track, well, here we are once again, the Bay Area and Silicon Valley leading that wave. And if you were to chart it by intensity, here we are again, leading every other part of the country. This is a chart showing you early adopters. It's showing you the federal research dollars that are coming in. It's showing you the company formation. And so again, by all of these indicators, we're far away. This is a chart that's showing you the concentration of tech jobs and tech talent and how that compares to other regions. And once again, San Francisco, Silicon Valley, when you combine, we're far ahead of any other region. So I would like all of us to understand that despite layoffs, despite talk of an exodus, despite some population decline, that Silicon Valley continues to do what it's been doing for 80 years. This is another indicator, unicorns and decacorns. You probably know this, I don't need to remind you, but a unicorn is a privately held company that's valued at more than $1 billion. And a decacorn is the same thing, only it's valued at more than 10 billion. And our region has the world's highest share of those kinds of companies. It's really extraordinary. And then you might wonder if we're continuing to generate new companies, and we are. This is the chart that shows you what that looks like over a 5-year period. Oh, actually, what we're charting here are 5-year periods over a 30-year segment of time, and those trends are just enormously positive and showing upward growth. So I would have you understand, here's patents. And guess what? 20,000 patents came out of our region last year, and it's really quite remarkable. So that's how I think we should understand what's happening in the Silicon Valley economy right now. Firing on most of the cylinders. Our companies are right-sizing. They're doing some recalibrating. Yes, they're laying some people off. They're capturing a lot of efficiency gains. It's translating into profitability. And in terms of our market cap is the value of all of the publicly held companies. We have a $16 trillion market cap. It's the highest number ever recorded. And so I think objectively, from a clinical standpoint, we need to understand Silicon Valley as a strong, prodigious, high-performing economy. This is still the case. But now I want to ask this question. People are wondering, well, what about the commercial real estate and the fact that our built environment is getting hollowed out? And that's true. So let me speak to that for a little bit. And let me first just make the big statement, which is, yes, that's happening. That's absolutely happening. People are working from home. In fact, I've got some figures on that. The Bay Area loves working from home. We absolutely loved it. When this became a thing, we went for it. We embraced it. We made it our new lifestyle. We made it our new norm. Before the pandemic, there were only 5% of us that were working from home. Since the pandemic, that's grown to 35% are working from home, 35% or more. And then it's not really telling you the full story because it correlates to income level. So if you're actually making more than $150,000 a year, 60% of that segment are working from home. So in other words, the entire tech sector, people in what we refer to colloquially as white collar professions, those are all happening from our homes. And we've embraced this and we're not going back. This, for example, is a chart showing you that in 2022, there was a national trend. Employers said, okay, we actually want you to come back to the office at least 3 days a week. And so here we're comparing ourselves to other major metropolitan regions, and those regions did. Their employees duly returned to the office because they were asked politely to do so. But in the Bay Area, we're not doing it. Even though employers have been sounding the same tune, they've said we'd like you back in the office. There's been a power balance shift, and the workers are calling the shots here. They really are. And so we're showing you Silicon Valley here, and only a third have gone back to the office in a significant way, and the rest are staying home, working from home. So that's how we need to understand ourselves. And yes, you're seeing a lot of this vacant space. The rates, by the way, are about 20% commercial vacancy in Silicon Valley. It's even higher in San Francisco. It's 32% in San Francisco. And this is our new normal. I want to suggest that we're not going to see a recovery from that anytime soon. And so the real questions we need to be asking ourselves, what are we going to do with all of this empty space? Can it be converted to new uses, new and productive uses? And here's a key question: can it be converted into housing? Because that continues to be a major need in the Bay Area where we live. This, by the way, is showing you the activity in our big downtowns. And I think you'll be interested by this. In 2022, our big three downtowns had shrunk to a place where they were no longer recognizable from what they had been previously. And you've been reading about this, the hollowing out of San Francisco in particular. And so this is what it looked like in 2022. This is tracking it by cell phone activity. But you may be interested to know that that trend had reversed itself in San Jose only a year later. And San Jose is now back up to about 95% of its activity rate compared to the year 2019, prior to the pandemic. So that's an astonishing recovery. I'm not sure I can explain it. I'm not sure I have the answer, but there it is. Nevertheless, San Francisco has not recovered. It is not. It's not recovering. In fact, here's a map of San Francisco's downtown, and every one of those dots is a closed establishment, and the trend continues. San Francisco is a great city. It continues to be a great city. It's one of our nation's greatest cities. But a real hardship has set in as the tech companies decided that they're going to embrace remote work. They've surrendered their real estate. That has introduced shuttering of the supporting adjacent industries, including retail. And suddenly the downtown is really suffering. And San Francisco has its best people on it, but they're going to be some time in recovery. And I think we just need to understand that. Okay, in our remaining time, I want to make sure that we leave time for questions. I just want to talk now about what it's like to live here and how people are doing. We talked about, so far what we've been talking about is the anthill, right? We've been talking about what an amazing anthill it is and how prodigious all the activity is, and that is teeming with all of this movement. That's what we've been talking about. Now I want to ask you a different question. I want to ask, how are the ants doing? If you were to interview an individual ant and ask, how's your life? How do you feel? I'd like to actually turn our attention to those questions. So one measure of well-being is, are you well compensated? And we should start by talking about how much people are earning in Silicon Valley. So here's a chart of average annual earnings, and this one tells you that the average earnings are about $180,000. That's a staggering number. And I want you to see it in context. The average for the United States as a whole is around it's around 70,000. And so we are more than double the national average. Staggering, amazing. Now, this chart is also lying to you, because this is not really telling you what's going on in Silicon Valley with most people. What we have in Silicon Valley are really, really high earners. In fact, the nation's highest earners, and so they throw off the averages. So we're always looking for other ways to measure this, including this one, which is median income, and this is showing you median household income. But even using this number, this measure, you can see that we're still doubling the national averages. So there is something to this. People come to Silicon Valley and they're pursuing a path to prosperity. Some are fabulously successful, still larger numbers, highly successful. And then we also have people that are barely getting by, and I want to talk about that. In fact, I'd like to talk about it outright. This is the Gini coefficient. And let me just quickly review, in case it's been a while since you took that economics class in college. Gini coefficient is a measure of wealth, and it's telling you that if in your economy one person was holding all of the wealth, then that would be a score of 1, or actually you could call it 100. Okay, so a score of 100 on the Gini scale means that one person holds all of the wealth and the other 99 people hold none of the wealth. A score of 0 on the Gini scale tells you that all of the people hold all of the wealth equally. They all have an equal share. Now, the United States on that scale is right in the middle. We're at about 50-55. Okay, so there's your context. Now, I'd like to show you what Silicon Valley looks like on the Gini scale. And there it is. Look at this. In 1990, we were around 37 on the Gini scale. A number that most people consider to be really healthy. Silicon Valley was, for the most part, a middle-class town. We were people that were all concentrated in that mid-range. And then 30 years go by, and look what's happened to us. We are now at, right here, beyond 80 on the Gini scale. Economists, especially developmental economists, also international economists, will tell you that those are the conditions for revolution. And we're talking about French Revolution. Those people will tell you that those are the conditions where you would actually expect blood in the streets. And that's what's going on in Silicon Valley today. We have the nation's highest wealth gaps and highest income gaps. In fact, let me put it here for you in plain English. In Silicon Valley, households in the top 10% are holding 70% of the wealth. And then here's the other part of the story. Households in the bottom half. In other words, half of our households hold only 1% of the wealth. So this is staggering, and you won't see anything like it anywhere in the country and in most parts of the world. So we need to understand Silicon Valley in that way. Many people are astonished to learn that in Silicon Valley, almost a third of our households are not self-sufficient. And by that, we mean their salary, their earnings are not sufficient to cover their needs. And the only reason they are subsisting is because they're receiving some form of assistance. And it's coming from a family, extended family, or from a government program, or from their church community. So we should also understand Silicon Valley in this way. And here, we're looking at children. And what we've learned is that 37% of Silicon Valley's children are living in households that are not self-sufficient. So that's pretty staggering. Here's a chart we take no pleasure in sharing with people, but when you break it down by race or ethnicity, then it's even more staggering. There are these persistent disparities, and we can detail those for you. There's a question that people ask. There's always been this hope that education is the answer, that education provides that path forward, and education can be the great equalizer. Unfortunately, in Silicon Valley, we're discovering that that's not the case. In Silicon Valley, what we've discovered is that there are huge disparities that are persistent, and those are disparities by race. We've learned that if you are white, not Hispanic or Latino, and you have a bachelor's degree, then on average, your salary is around $160,000. If you are Hispanic or Latino, you also have a bachelor's degree. We've learned that your income is around $120,000. In other words, a gap. Actually, it's I'm reading the chart incorrectly. It's around $100,000. So there's a gap of $60,000, even though both segments have the same level of education, and that's persisting throughout the region. So we're not sure how to explain that result. We're trying to understand that better than we do, but there it is. That's a fact in Silicon Valley. And then let me conclude by telling you that the other hope was that our our driving industries, our technology companies, the hope is that that could also be an equalizer, that they would be providing opportunities to all of the races, all of the ethnicities, and so that it could have this lifting effect. But what we've learned is that that's not happening. Um, if we measure it objectively and from a clinical standpoint, we've learned that the leadership roles in Silicon Valley's largest tech companies are being filled by Caucasians, whites who are not Hispanic or Latino. And then the second largest category is Asians. So 61% of the leadership roles at tech companies are filled by whites, 25% are filled by Asians, and then only minuscule percentages are filled by Hispanic or Latino or Black or African American techies. So this is just an enormous disparity, and it doesn't seem to budge. We're not seeing progress on that score. I'm doing a time check. Oh yeah, we're out of time. I'd like to propose that I stop talking, and I'll stop sharing my screen. The only thing I haven't showed you yet is housing, but I think you already understand that. In fact, you might understand it better than me. Housing is continuing to be out of reach for most of the people that live in Silicon Valley, and those trends are worsening. They're not getting better, despite exodus, despite all of the other things that I've been showing you. The housing prices continue to rise, and the construction and the permitting of new housing units continuing to continuing on a decline. So here's my last statement. How should we understand Silicon Valley? Well, we should understand it as a paradox. It's a paradox. It's a place of fabulous opportunity, amazing wealth, extraordinary success that has been sustained over a very long period of time. It's also a place of extraordinary hardship. And both of those things are happening simultaneously. And I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Russ, for your highly informative presentation. Really fantastic and gives me great insight. I'll start with one question I have that I've been curious about since the pandemic began. Several years ago, I heard that David Kelly, a co-founder of the company IDEO and a creator of the Stanford University's D School, said Silicon Valley is like Florence in the Renaissance in terms of the wealth, the creativity, all of that.
Yes.
As you're aware, Florence in the Renaissance was a direct result of the Black Plague, which decimated the population, upended local social and economic orders, and prompted rapid innovation. And I'm curious about your thoughts on if Silicon Valley is like Florence in the Renaissance, what impacts do you think the recent pandemic has and will have long term on Silicon Valley?
Yep. Yep. I think we are like Florence. There is that same level of creativity, ingenuity, a sense of possibility, and it's manifest in our companies, the things that they're inventing, the ways that they're changing the world. But it's also being manifest in other interesting ways, like the buildings that we're building, the things that are housing these incredibly successful companies. They're building now on a monumental scale, on a grandiose scale, on an iconic scale. And so it does have this feel of Florence. And shall we liken the pandemic to the Black Plague? Actually, no. I don't think that comparison would be apt, because it turned out that the pandemic was nothing but a bonanza for Silicon Valley. It introduced more opportunity, not less. And we saw, even during the pandemic, in terms of most indicators, record-breaking performances, even while the rest of the world was really struggling. So there's something amazing. We have this amazing property. But I'd like to throw out another metaphor, which is we are like Florence, but it's also like the Gilded Age. And the Gilded Age was, the turn of the century, turn of the 19th to the 20th century, when America was characterized once again by these staggering gaps, the high flyers, and then especially in the metropolitan regions where people were living in tenement housing and not thriving in any way. And that opened up, led a path to the Great Depression, and then everything that followed. So I think both things are going on, and they're going on simultaneously. And I'll just say it once again, we're a paradox. We really are.
Great. Russell, thank you so much for the great presentation insights. I'd like to now open it up for attendees to ask questions. Please raise your virtual hand and I'll call on you. Remember, one question per person and no speeches, please. Gary.
Thank you, Russell. That was very informative. I was really struck by your talk about the wealth inequality and the nexus with housing.
Yep.
And I'd like to talk, as an illustration, I'll talk about one of the ants. We have an employee at the History Museum who lost her lease, and she's desperately looking for a place to live. And so she's found a lot of dead ends, but she found one person who had something available at $2,800 a month. She's currently paying $1,200 a month, and she really cannot go that high. So she asked, can you give me a break? I work at a nonprofit. See what you can do for me. And the landlord came down to $2,600. They just don't get it, some of these people. And that's the wealth inequality. How do we tackle that one?
Yeah. I don't know. And I'm not dodging your question. I don't know. I haven't figured it out. It's become a crisis, and our leaders are starting to recognize it as a crisis. The parlance has changed. They're no longer talking about the housing shortage. They're talking about the housing crisis. And we're seeing some willingness to face down those NIMBY forces that are in every city council chamber. And so that might help. In November, we will all have the opportunity to vote on a historic bond, a $20 billion bond that regional leaders are placing on the ballot. That will make billions of dollars available for the construction and provision of affordable housing, not luxury housing, but affordable housing, if we choose to do that. It's not clear whether the support is out there to pass it. The NIMBY voices are real. And then the forces that developers themselves face to have a construction project pencil out. Those are very real. I don't know how you budge that in a place that's already built out, that has community resistance, but it's continuing to generate more jobs, more job growth. I think those are the conditions that will only produce more of the same. And I think that's what we're looking at for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I'm just worried it's going to be too slow, too little, too late. But that's one of the threats to Silicon Valley, isn't it?
Well, it is, absolutely. It's our Achilles heel.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tamara.
Thank you for the fantastic presentation. The last administration has passed the CHIPS and Science Act, ARPA-H, infrastructure law. I'm wondering what you, at Joint Venture Silicon Valley, what would you like to see the next administration and the next Congress focus on passing?
Housing. We need help on housing. It's profoundly local issue, but the federal government can help with a variety of things around tax law and also the regulatory climate for these things. So we could use the help there. Our economy fires, and we do that because we're a dynamic, innovative economy that's continually upending the world and reinventing. And so we've historically had a hands-off relationship with the federal government, and I don't feel like this is an economy that needs any particular help. But what is helpful to us is infrastructure. And there, I mean, transportation infrastructure, but also communications infrastructure. We have world-class companies, but we don't have a world-class infrastructure in place to support them or all of us who are living here. So we could really use help on high-speed rail, on the completion of our BART project to downtown San Jose, and then its linkage to Caltrain going back up the peninsula, the electrification. That would be my agenda for the federal government.
Thank you, Russ. Scott Hunter.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Russell. It's always great to listen to you. and hear what you have to say. My question quickly is, do you have a chart similar to the one that you had regarding race, but that regards age? Do we know the age of the workforce that's being hired around the area?
Uh, I will take that as a homework assignment. I'll get you that material, because that would be interesting to know. We do have data on age. I don't know if we have it within the technology companies, if they are sharing that information, but we do know the age of our workforce and how that breaks down.
Yeah, that's why I'd be curious.
Yeah, me too.
Great. Well, thank you. Last call. Any last questions? We have time for one more, maybe. Nadja, you have your hand up?
I do. Sorry, I couldn't find my virtual hand fast enough. Similar to Scott's question about age and work, I think age and poverty, I think, is really interesting. What we're seeing in the nonprofit world is that our elderly population is the one that's falling most swiftly into homelessness. They're seeing a huge uptick in need, and we're really not set up to support people as they age, even if they, as they age, whether they're aging in place or not. And so I think that's also really interesting, and people don't necessarily think about that. They think about, oh, the people who moved here in the 40s, they've got it made, but they don't realize insurance has gone up so much. Property taxes are actually still going up, all of the threats that are happening, and then people don't have anything to live on. So I think it's part of like painting the entire picture of the inequality of our region, I think would be very interesting. So
I want to thank you for that, because I think that's a really insightful comment, and it's an important one, and we're not grasping that. I'll tell you, we are not. But elderly account for the largest segment of our homeless population, and then there's also this phenomenon of elderly people feeling trapped in their homes. They would be happy to sell and go to some other place, except that when you go to some other place, now you're looking at a new cost basis. And I mean, assuming you want to stay in the state and close to grandchildren, that type of thing. And then because of the strange things about Prop 13, it's just, it's prohibitive. It becomes actually prohibitive to leave. And so, yeah, we have a lot of work to do around that one.
Russ, we're about out of time, but I see one more hand up. Do you have a few more minutes to stick around?
Yeah, my pleasure.
Great. Janine, last question.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for spending extra time. So many of the slides, especially in the latter part of your presentation, really demonstrate some racial disparities, and it's really hard to explain them away. My posit is that they're just the continuation of ages old, decades old policies, enablements that went to one dominant culture and lack of enablements to others. And those downstream effects they're not abating, they're magnifying. We live in an age, though, where everybody says if you are smart enough, if you are educated enough, you can benefit, and things will equalize. But we see, and you show the chart, that it doesn't. My question to you is this: in an age where corrective measures to try to eliminate the effects of those historical things are just not popular, they're viewed as preferential. How do we actually correct the effects of these extremely race-based exclusionary policies that are inherent both in our local economies and all the way up to the Fed level?
Yep. I wish I knew the answer to that question. I'm not sure anybody knows the answer to that question. If we had it, we would be doing it. So I just want to accept the spirit of the question. I want to agree with the premise of the question, and doing anything about it is going to take dramatic changes in our hearts, in our minds. It might also require draconian measures on the parts of regulatory bodies, powers that we have not granted in our history. We've never granted those kinds of powers. So this is difficult. I agree with your premise. It's really difficult. But thank you for the question.
Thank you, Russell. I know we're at end of time here. I have a few brief announcements to make. We're going to join the Los Altos City Council in taking a break for the summer. Our next meeting will be Friday, September 6th, 8:30, 9:30 a.m. We'll announce the topic in several weeks. If you'd like to be added to the coalition mailing list, please send an email to info@losaltoscommunitycoalition.org. This email is posted in chat for your convenience. We want to express a big thank you to Los Altos Mountain View Community Foundation for providing coalition with financial and in-kind support. Finally, Russell, thank you once again for a great discussion day. Really appreciate your taking the time to join us. Everybody, have a good summer.
You too, Kim. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.